Hello, welcome to episode 2 of Motorcycle Island, and today I'm joined by Paul Phillips. Paul is the TT Business Development Manager, and you have the enviable, I think, responsibility for the likes of the sort of sporting elements, logistical elements, commercial elements of the greatest race on earth. But here we sit, less than 90 days to go now, after a big long break. So firstly, thank you for taking the time in your it's got to be a busy schedule right now, but you must be as excited as some of the racers are to crack on, right?
There was a time where the TT felt so far away from ever being on again. And of course, I guess there was a time when there was maybe some uncertainty that it would ever be on again even. And then all of a sudden, it feels like we're on a conveyor belt that's moving really, really quickly into doing the first TT in 3 years, but also a TT that is almost different in every way compared to the last one we did, with lots more ambition, lots of new initiatives and whatnot. So it feels full on at the moment, and if my colleagues and I, if our eyes are open when we're working normally at the moment, and there's a lot to do, but it is exciting. I think for it to be back is exciting, but to be part of so many new exciting initiatives and the challenge and I suppose the fear of failure of doing so much but it is all exciting too.
You've obviously got a great deal of things that are going to be changing for TT22, and you've drip fed it to the public via the media over the last 18 months with a very careful plan, but it wasn't all because of the COVID break, was it? I think you were planning things before, right?
The COVID break has helped us a lot in terms of gifting us the time to do this work. And I think without it, I would be concerned about where we might have ended up with TT, because I think there is a lot of change going on, and I know in some corners, as is always the case, people are resistant to change and whatnot. But everything that we're doing comes back from a starting point of wanting to ensure that the TT can survive year after year, and the point I was trying to make there was that there were or are looming threats to the TT. Because you could say, well, why change? Why change? The TT was fine. It was great in 2019. Well, it wasn't. It rained, but it was all going great. More people were coming, etc., etc., etc. And that is all true. We do a lot of work. We do a lot of research. We do a lot of customer analysis. We know the cost of everything, and we get to see the information that's coming down the line, and the TT was running or is at risk of being left behind in some areas. There are, if you think about our audience, which is probably one of the biggest threats to the TT globally, it's quite small, very small, and it's got gaps. Big important gaps, generational gaps, which is an issue because the TT would effectively die out with its audience, and it's got territorial gaps. It's basically not. It's invisible in lots of parts of the world. So that's a big challenge for us. We've done a lot of work around risk management and whatnot, and we could. There are a number of areas where there were risks to the viability of the TT there. We've had an opportunity to look at infrastructure and our facilities and all that kind of stuff, and we've got a lot of work going on there. And then there's the business model of TT. It's not ran by a motorcycle club, it's not ran by a sports promoter, it's run by a government for economic reasons, and for it to exist, it's got to be returned to the island's economy. So that's what has been driven all this, and I think, like your point was, this hasn't all come out of the pandemic. It hasn't. We were on a course to do some of this already, but the pandemic has allowed us probably to turbocharge some of our plans and spend some time really doing more in-depth work and stripping some stuff back to the bones and looking at things and challenging them, like, if we were to do this from scratch, how would we do this rather than how have we habitually done it?
We're entering a new generation of TT, yet it's still going to be almost identical motorbikes with almost identical riders riding an almost identical, pretty much almost perfectly identical TT mountain course. But it's everything around it that is just going to bring it to the next level. I think one of the phrases you used was a global sporting, not phenomenon, but a global sporting event.
Ultimately, you're absolutely right. At the core, it's unchanged. The mountain circuit is virtually unchanged since 1911. It's still motorcycles racing round. It's still so accessible. You can kind of watch within reason, wherever you want to watch for free. The paddock's always open. You can access the riders in probably like no other motorsport. But yeah, in terms of how we produce it, how we create it, how we package it, and how we give it to people, whether they are boots on the ground, people coming to the event, or whether they're people seeing it around the world, either for the first time or the regular fans, all of that is different.
So one of the limiting factors must be about the amount of people that can physically come to the Isle of Man, whether that's a restriction on the amount of flights that come in, ferries that come in, rooms that are available, tent spaces that can be pitched on. Surely in your strategy, in your ethos, it must be about trying to, well, you've already talked about gaps, generational gaps, and also geographical gaps. One of the big, and it's no surprise to any of our audience here, that you're going to be broadcasting the TT live for the first time ever. I mean, what an undertaking that must have been.
In terms of attendance, the TT currently attracts in the region of 45,000 people to the island during the event, and that is particularly in the middle of it at a ceiling. So the maximum capacity the island can take in terms of visitors is around 32,000, which is where it peaks. And when I talk about that, that's the travel and accommodation infrastructure, but probably the broader infrastructure, where that's the road network, hospital, etc. And it will always get more expensive. It's never going to get cheaper. It will always get more expensive. You know, the fixed costs around setting the course up, insurance, medical cover, all that kind of stuff. There's only one way that's ever going to go. You know, you've got that ceiling in terms of attendance. You've got to look at different ways to ensure that the future financial viability runs in line with the future cost increases. In 2023, we adjust the schedule quite considerably, and that is certainly aimed at dealing with that in terms of maybe flattening out that curve in the middle of the TT where we reach that 32,000. So maybe trying to move some people out of that, and also offer the opportunity to maybe turn over some of the travel and accommodation stock. But again, we're not, you know, nobody should think we're going to jump to 60,000 people attending the TT all of a sudden, because it's, you know, we're a small landmass with a certain amount of infrastructure. But in terms of what we can do in audience more generally, and the TT is not the only sporting event with a venue capacity. You know, any stadium sport, for instance, is create more fans. And the TT has been online, social media channels, whatnot. There's been highlights coverage of the racing successfully in the UK and dotted around the world here and there. You know, a bit of America, a bit of Australia, a bit of sort of pan-Europe, but huge gaps, and that's limited coverage. And the potential is that, you know, the TT is so spectacular. The people who take part in it are generally very interesting and very accessible. The venue is beautiful, maybe not today, but generally it's, you know, it's a beautiful island. It has so much history, and all those things packaged together mean that we've got a real opportunity to give that to more people and can get more people interested in the TT. And I grew up with the TT. You know, my mum and dad owned a house on Sulby Strait. My bedroom overlooked the circuit, and when I was a kid, the TT was just the most important thing in the world. And, you know, as I've grown up with it and lucky enough to start working on it, I think it's fabulous, and I think everybody else should know about it and think it's fabulous. And I think our job is to try and introduce more and more people into the TT. And many of those people may never come to the island, but that doesn't mean they can't contribute to its future success. And the TT is like any other product, actually. You know, the size of your audience will match the success that you generate, and it's absolutely critical if we want there to be a TT in 10 years' time or 20 years' time that we start to engage younger audiences and new audiences. And as I said earlier, that was probably the biggest risk to the whole thing, really, that we were about to go into audience decline. We
probably don't need to cover the sort of the broadcast technicalities, because that's all been aired already with the announcement, the recent announcements. But what are the most exciting parts? What's the biggest potential here with the sort of live broadcasting?
We talk about the TT being the most accessible motorsport in the world, and if you're here on the Isle of Man, it is. You can kind of go anywhere. You know, you can go in, you know, almost in the Honda awning and see the bikes being worked upon, which is really unusual. And you can move around the island, you can almost watch anywhere you want. But actually, outside of the live experience, it's completely inaccessible around the world. You know, there's hardly any access to it. And what I mean is, you know, access to coverage of it. Whereas now, in a few months' time, anybody with an internet connection anywhere in the world will be able to watch every second of it, from the moment it starts on the Sunday afternoon with the first qualifying session to the last second we're in the winners enclosure or on the podium behind me at the senior, and that's a huge, it's going to be like scheduled over 40 hours of coverage. And then on top of that, all the stuff we're doing with behind the scenes, documentary making and all this kind of stuff, just give more people more access than they've ever had before. And that really is, we could really tick the most accessible motorsport event in the world box there. In 2018, we did some testing with the kind of equipment we're going to use. Not specifically to get to this point, but with one eye on hopefully at some stage. Obviously the stage is now. And that was kind of some cameras, some heli, just filming, not produced or edited or anything like that, just filming. And it was just testing the kit. And we've got access to that. I've watched, for instance, the start of the senior TT from 2018, the kind of pre-race and then a bit of the race. And it's just completely different. And I'm really excited to I'm excited to see what it looks like when it's properly produced with, presenting talent and on-screen graphics and properly edited and proper commentary. And I'm also excited that people will get to see it because, if you take the senior TT, it's a 2-hour race. It's broadcast in a 1-hour highlight show that is on commercial television. So we take out 15 minutes of adverts, that's down to 45 minutes. Then we have a bit of magazine stuff and whatnot. It's probably down to 30 minutes of coverage. Whereas a 2-hour race will be 4 hours of coverage and it'll be everything. And watching that all play out on the grid, if you think about like highlights coverage, it will dot around with a couple of riders and whatnot. We can see everything going on there, all of the atmosphere and the conversations and just could do so much more. And also I've watched the same race. I've watched from when Peter Hickman crossed the line till the end of the podium and the whole kind of finish. And the winners enclosure as a good example. The winners enclosure, I've witnessed some really special things down there, and I don't think there's a winners enclosure in any form of motorsport that has the same level of energy and emotion as ours does. There's all the normal kind of celebrations and whatnot, but there's often a sense of relief in there. Survival. It just means so much. And there's no backslapping and handshaking. It's real euphoria and stuff. And again, in the TV show, we're not able to portray that because there isn't enough time to do it. There's got to be kind of quite staged interviews against backdrops and all that kind of stuff. Whereas watching that just play out, which is what it will be when we do it live, it's just fantastic. And again, I'm looking forward to people seeing that.
Some of the riders, they do talk so passionately about that particular moment, don't they? From crossing the line, because everything they've done for weeks, months, possibly even years, up to that, the first time they leave, they get the tap on the shoulder and they've gone down the Glencrutchery Road. And everything builds up to crossing the line and coming in and down the return road, and I'm looking over my shoulder because it's literally right here, and to the winners enclosure. And John McGuinness only said to me yesterday, he said the emotion, he said some of the riders come in, this in floods of tears, just because of that relief, whether they're finishing first or 21st. But it's the general public, we don't get to see that, do we? Not on broadcastable television, but also if you're not one of the 45 people in and around that, you just don't get to see that kind of euphoria. It's
a really human thing, and it is all about emotion and whatnot. And I think as viewers of sport or any kind of entertainment, that's what we like and that's what resonates with us, and that's why I think the TT can be so successful as an expanded broadcast proposition, because the bikes aren't really the story, it's the people, it's the human element, and I think the characters involved in TT will really have the potential, or do have the potential to get a much bigger audience for themselves and the event.
Well, let's just touch on some of the other changes. We're sitting in race control at the moment. That perhaps if you spin around and have a quick look at some of those screens. In fact, if we get up and have a little walk around, how about that? So tell me what's going on here. For those that have not seen the previous version of race control, there's a lot of screens, there's a lot of desks. You can barely see out the windows for all the screens that there are. What are we going to see? What are we going to see on these screens?
Yeah, so this is where the clerk of the course and his team and the emergency services effectively coordinate the event from. You've got all of the kind of controllers who control the sectors of the course, the 12 sectors of the course. You've got the emergency services coordinating not just what happens to run the race itself, but the rest of the islands, and the coordination between the emergency services joint control room, and to keep the rest of the island running when the main arterial route around the island is closed. You've got the medical team is coordinated from here, and the air med, etc. And they have access to all sorts of information, whether that's where riders are in sectors. There is a new GPS system being trialled at this year's TT, which will be, if the trial is successful, it will be mandated in the future, so they'll have GPS access to everything that's moving.
Will the public have access to that eventually?
TBC. There's not been a conversation. It's not been designed for that reason, and there are considerations that would need to be thought through. But it was designed for this room ultimately. Things like there's a CCTV system being developed, but in the short term they're going to have access to the raw feed of the live broadcast, so they can see more of the course. From here, they communicate with people like the travelling marshals and all of the marshals around the course from here.
And then other changes that we can see from our immediate vicinity. It's quite a good vantage point up here. Despite the weather, we can see quite a lot going on. Yeah. We talked about Winner's enclosure. Will that remain?
Yeah, the Winner's enclosure has had a load of work done on it, actually. Boring as it looks, but just new fencing, and there's new infrastructure going in there. There's a lot of work planned on this site, more than I've ever known, between now and TT. A lot of that is quite dull. It's brand and brightness stuff, fixing stuff, painting stuff, just making it look as nice as possible for when our visitors come. And there's a lot of boring stuff in the ground, that nobody ever sees, but it's really important. Refurbishment of the facilities for like the shower blocks down there and the toilets, and made quite a big investment in facilities for people with disabilities, so like new disabled toilets and that kind of thing. We've got our mobile medical centre coming to the island soon, which is great. It's going to be located down there somewhere, which gives this site that houses thousands and thousands of people for a couple of weeks, a little mini hospital outside the hospital, really, to look after, things, the medical care of the people living and working in here.
Of course, there'll be people here for 2.5-3 weeks, won't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Taking over the paddock area here.
But things like drug and alcohol testing, medical examinations, access to prescriptions and things like that. Pit lane's undergoing a lot of work. Looks a bit average at the moment, but it will come together. There are now only 60 pit boxes, so effectively there's been more added, but previously they were all 2 per stanchion. Yes. So every pit box is twice as big as it was previously.
And that's presumably to prevent incident in the pit.
Yeah, give people more working space. The pit crews are now up from 3 to 4, so there's a 4th person in charge of fire safety, fire safety equipment that we provide. So a bit like World Endurance Championship pit stop. New handrails on all of the stanchions for when people are filling the fuel bowsers. And there's lots of other bits of tidying up work to go in there. Also, which is completed now, is the Parc ferme, that side of the site.
Should we walk that way?
We can do, yeah. It's effectively twice as big now.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, you've done a load of work out here.
Yeah, so, you can see the join. So it's not quite twice as big, but nearly. And that fixes a lot of different issues. First of all, it gives more operating space, and with slightly less competitors in the events, obviously that also impacts upon that. It means that the sidecars in qualifying can move into the Parc ferme rather than having to use the pit lane as a Parc ferme. And what that means is that the pit lane will always be open for testing right throughout qualifying. And then when a qualifying session is live, previously when a bike was to come out of the Parc ferme and access the track again, it used to come up the ramp there and out a small little gap at the end of pit lane and join the course here, which was far from ideal. Now the bikes will move down pit lane and exit at the end of pit lane like they would do in a race. So it was a real safety risk there, which has been addressed by making the bigger Parc ferme actually. But it has a number of different issues, and you think about the Parc ferme, the pit lane, the number of competitors, all those things work together as part of a process. And one of the big things that's come out of the time is the introduction of a safety management system, which is a proper systematic approach to risk management, so a much more proactive position when we look at risk rather than what has perhaps traditionally been a more reactive. Something's happened, and look to fix it. So now, processes are continually getting challenged, and how could they be done better? Whether that's using, making investment, changing a process, use of tech, or whatever it might be.
While we're standing here, there's something missing, isn't there?
The scoreboard.
Yes.
Yeah. So the scoreboard.
But it looks like even if the scoreboard hadn't have been taken down, there's a tree that would have.
Well, that was from storm
knocked it out.
Something last week or whatever. So the scoreboard came down. It was condemned effectively.
Been up there for a long, long time, hasn't it?
Yeah. It won't be there for 22, but it will be there for 23. A replacement will be there for 23. For 22, there'll be some video walls there, accessing the live time and some of the live video feed. The planning process for the new one is about to get underway, and if it goes without any issue, the build will start after the Manx Grand Prix later on this year and be ready in the springtime before next year's TT.
What will it look like? Can you give anything away?
I think on Wednesday they're going to release the drawings of it from the planners and stuff. So. Yeah, it's a pretty.
It might be popping up on screen right now.
It's a mix of tradition and some modern technology in there.
Will the Scouts still be involved?
They will be, yeah.
Oh, great news.
Yeah. I mean, the design is built around the Scouts still being involved. Yeah.
Should have been a competition, shouldn't it, for Scout to design it?
Yeah, so and it'll be the same. I think the same size and occupy the same space. I think people often oversimplify these things, but it's not a small job putting it back. Funding it's not been obviously a small job, and the planning process, the procurement of somebody to create it, and then the build. They're a big deal. And we've got 2 events that we can't be operating around, so it can't start until after the Manx Grand Prix.
The mountain course itself, I had a lap yesterday and I noticed there was a lot of trees down in one place up at Glentrammon, I think it was, and it really does open up the course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no wider than it ever used to be because curbs are still there, but it appears as though there's so much more room there. There was some new tarmac, some new surface down, was it up at McGuinness's, I think, possibly. Have there been any other changes to the course? I mean, obviously Governor's Dip's not been used in the best part of 3 years.
So I think whatever's happened during the pandemic up to this point has been for normal everyday road use. There hasn't been the normal TT prep, obviously, in that time, because there's been no TT to prep for. Today marks the start of that, really. The mountain road is shut now as we speak. Big road reconstruction going on at Stella Maris, and the prep of the mountain section is all getting done over this next 6 weeks there as well, and I think the course prep, there's a big piece of work getting done at the 11th milestone, and then lots of other smaller pieces. It's fair to say that the course prep is starting earlier, a good month earlier, maybe more. I'm not sure, and there's probably more getting done than would be in a normal year because there hasn't been the normal remedial works over the past couple of years. But there's no concerns around the course not being in tip-top shape by the time we get to the end of May. But it really is kicking off today, and it will transform now over 3 months, and all of a sudden it'll turn from still in kind of feeling pretty wintry and doesn't really look much like a racing circuit, and then halfway through May it'll really come together and it'll look like the TT course that people remember.
I guess now's the time to invest in hire car companies because you'll have all the races coming over the next few months, just refamiliarising themselves with the.
It was funny because there was I hadn't seen anybody from the motorcycle industry for years actually, other than on Zoom calls and whatnot. And then there was, I can't remember who the first person was that caught up with, and then it's just been since from the autumn last year all the way through now. There's just been a steady stream of people coming back, either because they want to come and see the circuit, but I think a lot of TT people love the Isle of Man. They've missed the island, and it's nice that they wanted to come back and catch up with people or just be here, really, which is interesting to see. Almost every day now there's somebody from the United Kingdom across to see us or to do something to do with TT or whatnot, which is great.
So magical, this place. Every time I touch down at Ronaldsway, it just gives me, I didn't even race, but it just still gives me that buzz of excitement to know that something magical happens here.
Yeah.
You talked about growing up as a TT fan, living on the course. I didn't come from the Isle of Man, and yet I still get that buzz, and I'm certain that the 35,000 people a year get the same kind of feeling coming over here.
So living on the course and being on the course every day, whether that was going to school and back or whatever, just seeing it kind of all getting prepared, and that nice weather, late May, the lights are getting longer, the nights are getting longer and all that kind of stuff. I really like that, and I still like that now. It's obviously different because working on it, there's like a lot of anxiety, in that period, you're running into the TT and stuff. But when the first TT was cancelled in 2020, the world was just so different, and it didn't. I can remember being out with my friends. In the island, we'd come out of lockdown. All the borders were out of lockdown. I remember being out with my friends on mountain bikes one Sunday, and we stopped at a cafe at the end of the ride, and it was like, today should be the Sunday in the middle of the TT, and it hadn't really registered with me, and it's just like life for me. Actually, never mind working on it, my life has always been synced around the TT. Growing up and whatnot, it's always been, Christmas and TT are two things that control the rhythm of your year, and it not being there, it's so important to the Isle of Man. I think the importance of it has been more widely felt whilst it's not been here. The whole absence makes the heart grow fonder thing, but also the economic impact of it not being there. But for the hospitality sector and the tourism sector, is it's acute, I've had conversations with people in the hospitality sector over this period of time. They describe TT as like a 13th month in the year in terms of takings and whatnot, and there are lots of businesses that really rely on it to be there, and not just businesses, the wider community, the sports clubs who turn their facilities into campsites, churches who run, tea and cake stalls and viewing and all those things, and all that income has been gone. So I think that's why we've seen so much support to bring the TT back, and to bring it back in better and stronger than before, and to be able to meet some of the challenges that it's facing the next few years. And I would be really excited and optimistic about its future at the moment.
It's a lovely point. You talk about the traditional side with the tea and cake at the churches, and then the sort of the juxtaposition of that, the broadcast element, and the umpteen cameras, positions, and helicopters, and it's the real difference, and that's the sort of magic that the TT can bring.
It is, and it can be all those things. It doesn't have to just be one thing for one person or one type of, fan or one type of person from the community or whatever. It can do a lot. It can be accessible to, the real hardcore fans who don't want any commercialisation, who want to, sit on the hedge and enjoy it in its rawest form. All that can always happen. For new fans who maybe have different expectations and are used to going to different types of sporting events, whether it's motorsport or what I say, we can deliver for them as well. And then for the local community and what they want out of it. I was driving home only recently, listening to the local radio, and chap that's in charge of the Football Association here was talking about the need for the TT to return because of the big gap in funding they've got to pay for facilities and for kids' football training and all this kind of stuff, and people wouldn't think that the TT plays that role there, but almost every football club on the Isle of Man runs a lucrative campsite at TT. TT benefits because it's bed nights for visitors, and the sports clubs benefit because they get money to pay for facilities and equipment, etc., etc.
Look at that, we're talking about the start of the TT and the sun's coming out. Paul, thank you so much for your time, and I wish you and your team all the very best for 22 and beyond.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Cheers. So if you're not coming to the Isle of Man, do get your $14.99 out and ready to invest, because there's going to be so much content coming your way before, during and after the last week in May and first week in June. Thanks for joining us. Any comments, questions, queries or thoughts, let us know. I'm sure Paul can help us out with the answers. Cheers.
The COVID break was really good to the TT.
That plays to the Russian narrative at this point. So the best game they have is limited.
Where's that come from?